Hi, you're welcome to my YouTube channel on Spreadsheet. In this session, we are going to familiarize ourselves with referencing. Um, if you are lucky enough to find this document from Microsoft, Exploring Microsoft Office 365 on Chapter 2 actually focuses on formulas and functions. In that chapter, you'll find referencing, whereby we introduce ourselves to relative referencing and absolute referencing. So today I'm going to take you through a short while on referencing in Microsoft Excel spreadsheets. Now let's familiarize ourselves with few items on relative referencing and absolute referencing. So I'm going to key in some few transactional data. I'll have a header called item, have quantity, have one for unit price, another for the selling price, and I'll have the tax deduction or tax amount. Let me autofill them. Now let's say we have items for building material. Let's say cement, we have plywood, we have nails, irrespective of the type. We have some form of power board. Those in Ghana we're more familiarized with power board. With cement, assuming your warehouse or your store, you have about 100 pieces, one at the moment being sold at, for the selling price, assuming that we have one as 98 cedis. At the time of recording this, I'm recording this from Ghana, so I'm using cedis as an example. Let's say plywood, you have about 90 of them. The selling price based on the type, 120 cedis. Nails, let me say we have nails quantity, you have about 200 boxes, and the unit price you have, let's say for if it's, let's say, a 3.5 nail, or so let's guess, put any price for the 150. Power board one, let's assume we have quantity of, let's say, 40, and we are selling one at 90 cedis. Now to determine, based on the data now we have here, to determine the selling price is being derived by multiplying the number of quantity by the unit price. So that is equal to cell B3 times cell C3. Enter. You get the amount, the selling price for cement. Now we need not to repeat these same steps, but we can use the autofill approach to do for the remaining. So I will just hover my mouse, send it to the right edge corner of the first cell that has the cement, that's the selling price for cement in column D3. I will double click on it to derive the rest for me. Now this introduces us to a topic on relative referencing. Now, why relative referencing? Relative referencing, in a sense that the formula keeps floating over time. Okay, it keeps floating over time. Now, I just did for the first one, and the first one has B3, column, cell B3, and cell C3. But when I did the autofill, the subsequent one came to rightly after B3 is after B3 is B4. So the next one picked automatically to B4, and its corresponding cell, that is a C4. The subsequent one moved from B4 to B5 in that order. So relative moved, it floats accordingly. That's the relative referencing. So it picks them automatically based on the coordinate that is being needed, or the cell that is being needed. The formula is being picked automatically and adjusts itself automatically. Now we move over to absolute referencing for us to see the difference. Assuming I'm capturing the tax, I'm going to work on the selling price. So tax deduction, the tax that I'm going to work on the selling price, let's say I'm going to work a 5% tax, and I'm capturing the 5% in cell G12. You can see G12 is here, the content and the name box and the content at 5%. Now I'll be working 5% on the selling price, which is, so the first item in the selling price is in D3. So in E3, which will contain the first tax, I would then perform the calculation for the first tax, that is on cement, equal to the 5% on or times the selling price for the first item, that is cement, and cement is in D3. Now, like we did for the selling price, once I do the autofill, it's supposed to pick them automatically, but we are going to record an error, and we are going to reason together why we have that error for the subsequent occurrences. So let me do the autofill for the rest to derive the tax amount that will be worked, the 5% tax that needs to be worked on. So autofill. Now we've seen that the first one we had an answer, but we expected to have meaningful outcome in cell E4 up to E6. But let's analyze it carefully. In cell E3, if you look at the formula, in the formula bar, it's speaking as G12, and G12 happens to be the 5%. So that is correct, and its corresponding cell that is multiplying by is on what the selling price, that is in D3. So that is correct. Let's move on to the subsequent one. The subsequent one, which is plywood, and its selling price in D4. We realize that now instead of G5, instead of the 5%, which is in G12, now it move on to G13, and there's no item in G13. So per calculation or per Excel understanding is working perfectly, but that is not what we need. We need to pick a constant value, which is 5%, which is G12 throughout the rest of the calculation. Now what is happening here is, after G12, the subsequent one moved to G13, the subsequent one moved to G14, and the last one moved to G15. But there are no values in G13, G14, and G15. So if I'm to pass any value in G13, we will see a subsequent change in cell E4, and in that order. So let me pass in a value for you to get it. So I'm passing in, let's say, 4. Now we have a value here because 4 has been passing. Now G13 is having a value in that order. So in this way, that is a relative reference. It keeps the formula keep floating or keep adjusting itself. But since there's no value here, and we want the 5% as a constant value, which is in G12, to be passed to every entry that requires for its computation or calculation. So this time around, we don't want the 5% to float or keep to float on. We just want to fix or capture the G12 or the 5% throughout the rest of the calculation on the task bit. So what we need to do in Excel, we need to then lock up the content of G12 from floating or from changing. Once it's floating, we say it becomes relative. To do that, we introduce ourselves to the pound symbol or the dollar symbol on the 5%. That's G12. So the dollar symbol before the G, and in between G and 12. You can as well go with the option of having just the dollar symbol before the G. So you have dollar symbol G12 or the pound symbol G12, and it's going to work as well for you. So enter. Now let me do my autofill to get the rest. Now we are getting value here. Now if you watch the first one is having G12 by D7, D3. The subsequent one is having the same G12 by D4 in that order. This time round, we have locked up the cell content with the dollar. So we've locked the G12 from changing, from floating. In this time round, what we've done is we have done an absolute referencing. Now, the mixture of the two, the mixture of relative referencing and absolute referencing will give you what we term as a mixed referencing. So if you watch critically, the text column now has a mixed referencing, with the first part as absolute referencing and the second part as D3, which is relative referencing, because when you move on to the subsequent one, we are seeing that it's floating, but the D12, which has been locked, is not floating. So someone may ask, what is the essence of it? The essence of it is that it saves time, it makes you more efficient when we are dealing with a vast data, when we are dealing with a whole calculation. For instance, you are preparing an income statement, you are preparing a budget, and you have some constant values across various sheets, and you want at any given time to make reference to it. A payroll officer wants to perform deduction on employee salary, and those values, the constant values in terms of tax, needs to be captured somewhere, so that in the future, when, let's say, the tax which you don't control internally has been changed, external force, the government has changed the tax value, or any other constant has been changed, you don't need to temper on the calculations in here, but all that you need to change is to go to the source where you have it as a constant, change it from there, and now you're a happy person. Then it saves you time, it prevents errors. So right now, let's practice this. Now, once I change this 5% to, let's say, 10%, anywhere is being referenced, we expect the values to change. So 10%, now there has been a new tax compliance that requires that we have to comply to a 10%. Now we have the values being changing. Let's see the pain that it will have taken if we are not doing this way when we have it at a constant. So let's do tax when we are not going by this approach, but we want to fix the 10% within the formula. And let's say there's a change which requires that we need to enforce the new constant value in our computation. So this column F will have the 10% as part of, or the tax figure or the constant as part of the calculation. So in here, I'm going to work 10% still on column D. That is the selling price. I'm going to work 10% on the selling price. So equal to 10% times D, and D is the selling price. Now relative, once I do the autofill, it's going to do the rest for me. Now I'm seeing the first one is having 10% by D3, the second one 10% by D4, the last the subsequent one is 10% by D5, and the last one happens to be 10% by D6. Now the selling price is in relative form, but the 10%. So tomorrow, if the 10% needs to change, let's say your regulator is asking you to change this 10% to, let's say, 15% or 11%. Now, unlike this part whereby once we change from the constant, it takes precedence in any place that we've made reference to. Now you have to then come here, change the first one, the first step. Let's notice the first step. The first step you change, let's say it's 11%. You change from 10 to 11. Enter. You have now the second step is now to do the autofill for it to take precedence. Unlike this, once you change from here, then it takes precedence to whoever you want to have it. So we advise that to be more efficient, you have to know how to use the absolute referencing together with the relative referencing and apply it to where it matters, where it can make you more efficient, reduce errors, and ensure that you have accuracy. Thanks for watching today's episode on relative referencing, absolute referencing, and mixed referencing. See you in other episodes.